If you were to try to think of one community on earth that tries to repress the sexual impulse entirely until death, the first one to mind is probably going to be the Roman Catholic clergy. Every Catholic priest famously takes a vow of celibacy, is not allowed to marry, and is expected to switch off from all sexual activity, including masturbation. But also, if you were to now try to think of one community on earth that is riddled with disastrous sexual sin, the first one to mind would probably be the Roman Catholic clergy. There's no group on earth that are more notorious for twisted sexual behaviour. Just some examples from summer 2018 are 34 Catholic bishops offering to resign in Chile because of a child sex scandal cover-up, a former Vatican diplomat being sentenced to 5 years in prison for child pornography offences, Australian Archbishop Philip Wilson resigning after concealing child sex abuse by another priest, and a Grand Pennsylvania jury naming more than 300 clergy in a report that found that more than 1,000 children had been abused under their care. All these stories happened just within one summer, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg. Countless sordid stories like these have dogged the Catholic Church for centuries and until the present day. Now, I don't think that this is a coincidence that the most famous group in the world to try to suppress their sexual impulse entirely is also the most famous group in the world for atrocious sexual sin. And indeed, this has got to be one of the strongest arguments against complete abstinence, that the test community where complete abstinence has been most extensively tried has returned these truly terrible results. It appears that when these priests try to repress their sexuality completely and try to push it into a dark corner, not only does it not disappear there, but it seems to mutate in that darkness. The strength of the impulse not only grows by neglect, but somehow it becomes twisted too, for not having been allowed healthier expression. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who attempts to repress their sexual impulse for life will become a child abuser. Far from it. But it is obvious that there's a link here. Remember, Paul implied that he had a gift of a low sex drive, and so he personally wasn't troubled by his singleness. And yet he admitted that singleness was an unfair command to place on everyone, and that it would lead to sexual immorality. Well, we see that exact thing playing out in the Catholic priesthood. Some priests seemingly can, and indeed do, manage to live their whole lives in celibacy. However, it's clear that the majority are not able to cope with that burden, and it's a contributing factor towards this mutated sexual behaviour. It seems that we're reaching a place of balance here now. We've discovered that enslavement to our appetites is explicitly stated in the Bible to be sin, but we've also now considered, with reference to a real-life test group, that the opposite extreme of complete starvation, complete suppression, may not be the safe answer either. So we're left asking the question, is there a healthy way to deal with our appetites here? Well, the healthy way to handle our food appetite is obviously moderation. Obviously, don't indulge it, but don't starve it either. Just eat moderately. The healthy way to handle our sleep appetite is exactly the same. It's moderation. Don't indulge it, don't starve it, just be moderate. And so there's an argument here that the healthiest way to handle our sex drive, as a single person anyway, could also be moderate masturbation. Don't indulge it, that's sin, but starvation is dangerous too, so just be moderate. From a purely biological perspective, taking morality out of it for a second, just from a purely biological scientific angle, there is evidence from the scientific community that this is indeed the healthiest approach. Experiments conducted over the past 20 years tell us that while both indulgence and starvation of the sexual appetite have negative outcomes, moderate masturbation has healthy outcomes. We'll discuss the health problems with enslavement to masturbation more fully in the next section. Basically, scientists have discovered it causes fatigue, lack of motivation, social anxiety, depression, and many other ailments. However, on the other hand, they've discovered that complete abstinence has its own health concerns too, and that the healthiest approach does seem to be moderate masturbation. For example, separate studies in 2003 and 2016 both suggest that prostate cancer is more likely in abstinent men. Toxins build up naturally in a man's urogenital tract, and ejaculation essentially flushes out their pipes and keeps them healthy. This significantly lowers their risk of cancer. This idea of masturbation keeping the pipes flushed out and healthy also applies to women. Female masturbation helps prevent cervical infections and relieves urinary tract infection by flushing bacteria from the cervix. For men, it's been discovered that when they ejaculate through regular sex or masturbation, their bodies release a little bit of cortisol, which helps to strengthen their immune system against infection. For women, orgasms with or without a partner gives them greater resistance to heart disease and type 2 diabetes. For both sexes, links have been discovered that suggest it helps to improve the quality of sleep and guards against insomnia. And of course, good sleep has knock-on benefits for daily life. And again, for both sexes, masturbation exercises pelvic floor muscles that help prevent erectile dysfunction in men and incontinence in both sexes as they age. So biologically, there are negative outcomes with enslavement, there are negative outcomes with abstinence, but moderation seems to offer only healthy outcomes. These positive outcomes are important to note because God has ordered the universe in such a way that sin always tends to lead to negative consequences, either for oneself or for another. For example, if you're enslaved to alcohol, then there's hangovers and disease. If you're enslaved to pornea, there's sexually transmitted infections and emotional heartbreak. If you're enslaved to food, then there are diseases associated with obesity. You see, God points us in the right direction and coerces our actions by putting penalties on sin. Therefore, the fact that there doesn't seem to be any health penalties associated with moderate masturbation reinforces the idea that it could be okay. It certainly doesn't do the case any harm, at least. We're reaching the end of the case for concession now, and the bottom line from this half of the series seems to be that if it's done moderately, without enslavement, and without looking with lust, there's a decent argument that it's an acceptable concessionary position. It's not marriage, it's not ideal, but in the absence of marriage, it helps to release sexual pressure and stops a person going into the red zone. Therefore, it helps to stop them burning with lust, which is a sin, and being tempted into pornea. Also, moderate masturbation, it turns out, provides health benefits like flushing the pipes of toxins, boosting the immune system, and things like that. And that's the end of the case for concession. I think I've done the best I can with this. I can't think of anything else that needs to be said. I find this whole thing very uncomfortable to talk about, but I think I've represented these arguments as best as I can, and I've given them a fair hearing, which is all that I really wanted to do. So hopefully it's at least given you some food for thought so far. Maybe you're persuaded, maybe you're not persuaded, but wherever you're at in your own mind, I'm now going to personally switch roles, and I'm going to start arguing against masturbation. What follows in the second half of the series are all the reasons why we should stay away from masturbation, all the reasons why it's a bad idea. What follows now is the argument for abstinence.